And so, yeah, I wanted to delve into this topic. Because I think tech workers are interesting on the one hand, because they're kind of an exception. So in post-industrial economies, the middle class has been largely under pressure, and middle class occupations have not really been growing in size much. And tech workers are one of the few exceptions, one of the few rising middle class fractions in post-industrial neoliberalism, if you like those terms. And they're also kind of interesting because they have this inscription power. That's what I call it in the book. This kind of influence on technology, right? On the apps that we use that, influence, where we go, what we buy, whom we fall in love with, what kind of news we read, all that, right? So they have this really, influence on our lives. And then I think they're also interesting, because they occupy this contradictory class location, right? So they're kind of located in between the tech elite, the kind of managerial financial class on the one hand, and the more precarious kind of digital workers, crowd gig workers on the other hand. And I think, the middle class for me is fascinating because, depending on where they orient themselves, the power balance shifts, right? So they kind of occupy this kind of pivotal position. They have this pivotal position in the digital economy, but also more generally. And maybe that's one final reason why I think tech workers are important. You could arguably call them this, almost like an avant-garde of the middle class, or kind of like symbolically and economically high status profession. It's kind of this rejuvenation of the American dream. And so with this book, I also wanted to make a contribution into, or for the field of kind of middle class research more generally. My interest here is on the one hand about tech, but it's also about where's the middle class heading? Who do you have to be nowadays to get a ticket into this class? What kind of characteristics, what kind of habitus do you have to cultivate? What kind of schemas of perception, recognition, and action do you have to confidently incorporate? That's kind of, maybe a more broader interest that I want to explore with you today. Okay, so before we can get to the empirical findings, we do need to take a step back into social theory. So I would say if we really want to understand the identities of tech workers, who these people are, we need to get a sense of what have been middle class identities so far. What kind of middle class identities can we distinguish in the history? If we look at sociological research, there's basically two ideal types. On one hand, one of them is the organizational self. This was arguably the ideal type of middle class identity in Fordist capitalism, in industrial capitalism, which we can locate between the 1920s and 1960s. Some of your fathers will likely they probably have some of the characteristics of an organizational self. This is a subject that used to work for one company or two companies for their entire career. It's a self that traded disciplined labor for job security, regular wage increases. This is a mostly male and white self. It's a self that is willing to accept the Faustian Pact, to use this German term, Faustian Pact in the sense of trading disciplined labor power and accepting a rather alienating, standardized, hierarchical work regime in exchange for that job stability and relative economic comfort. And then if we follow the sociological literature, this identity, there's a break in the not just the political economic structure, but also in the identity structures with the rise of post-industrial capitalism and the emergence of the entrepreneurial self. So this is now the middle class starts to cultivate more entrepreneurial identities, meaning even employees start to behave or are told to behave like entrepreneurs. Middle class people are told to be self-activated, self-responsible, to self-commercialize themselves. They are told you need to be flexible, you need to take ownership, you need to value autonomy. You should probably switch your employer every 3 to 4 years to continue gathering knowledge, gathering experience. You need to be ready for anything, right? So this is it's an ideal type, right? You will never find it in pure form, but there is something that really starts to shift in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, hand in hand with kind of political economic shift towards, what scholars call neoliberalism or post-industrial capitalism. Okay, and basically my interest is, does this theory of the middle class entrepreneurial self, does that hold in digital capitalism? Is if we turn to the professional segments of the digital economy, are we encountering entrepreneurial selves? Are we encountering these holistically market-oriented selves who favor self-fulfillment and creativity over stability and regular wage increases? That was a broader theoretical question. And I tried to find this out through large-scale interview studies. So I did interviews with tech workers in the US and Germany. I did this between 2020 and 2022. Happy to discuss later if, like the implications of that kind of specific time range. Things have arguably changed since then. I recruited tech workers through personal contact, snowballing, LinkedIn, which worked surprisingly well, and a co-working space in Berlin. I did. It's also worth mentioning from a methodological standpoint that I focused primarily on mid-level tech workers. So I wasn't really too interested in people who had just joined the workforce, because I assumed, you need to have maybe 2 years experience to really kind of have more of a kind of I need to put it in the right words, to have a certain level of engagement with the work culture in the tech industry, right? But I also didn't sample high-ranking managerial tech workers. So this is really, it's a study of the middle layers. So maybe salaries will help you, right? You guys work in tech. So in the US, the average salaries of my interviewees was $140,000. In Germany, it was 80,000 euros. You can tell me later if you think that's adequately mid-level. I hope so. Okay, and basically, small spoiler. So the key finding really is that not everything has changed. There's no total break with this identity of the entrepreneurial self, but there is arguably a transformation of middle-class identity if we look at tech workers, in the sense that while they still value self-control, flexibility, and self-optimization, there are a number of new cultures that we can make out that really distinguish tech workers from that ideal type. Okay. And let's turn to my empirical findings. So first, let's turn to the worldviews. And here, I can't cover all of them, but a central one is the return of social critique. I will pass the book around. You can take a look if you want to. Okay, so how does this return of social critique manifest? Well, we can see it here in a statement by Michael, a UX designer in the US. He told me, "We are probably in one of the most interesting times. I don't think we've seen this probably since the 30s or 40s, where there's a massive push towards socialism. I read yesterday the average CEO salary grew 1,000% over the last 30 years. The average for workers grew 16%. Along similar lines, Matteo, a data scientist from Germany, tells me, "It bothers me that workers have less and less wealth. If the state doesn't rebalance with taxes, it's going to be a disaster." And when we turn to politics, what I found is that tech workers have a pretty coherent voting preference. So Tara, a UX designer, told me, "I used to think I was conservative, but I really think I am more democratic leaning, just because, I don't know, to me, I choose to be a UX designer because I want to do good things for others. And I'm not seeing that from the Conservative Party here." Okay, so what can we see in this array of statements? Well, in the book, I argue we can see here that tech workers cultivate conflictive and hierarchical worldviews. In their world, they don't see the world as a flat network. Instead, how tech workers see the world is there are bosses on the one hand and workers on the other, and workers are not getting their share because bosses are getting more. That's what we call in sociology a class-based worldview. It's not a Marxist worldview. It's not a revolutionary worldview, but it's a class-based worldview. So you see society as conflictive. You see it as, as structured through the unequal distribution of different forms of economic capital in this case. What we can also see is pro-government attitudes, which is interesting. And a widespread preference for center-left parties in Germany, Die Grüne, the Green Party also, and in the US, mainly Democratic. However, there's a flip side, okay? So from a sociological standpoint, we do need to investigate or examine these statements critically, and I would argue it's important to note that the return of social critique rarely translates into collective practices. So when I asked my interviewees, for instance, are you a member of a union? 2 of 52 said they are members. Less than 5%. There weren't also a lot of reports about workplace action. Some tech workers told me they share their salaries. So there are some kind of practices, but in general, I think we have to come to terms with the fact that the critique of the economic system and of societal hierarchies, it's much more a discursive critique than one that manifests or translates into practices, especially collective practices were quite absent. Okay, let's look at another schema, another worldview of tech workers. I call this in the book the concern for diversity. So another thing that I found across interviews again and again was tech workers saying or critiquing the lack of diversity. So Mei Ling, a UX designer from the US, told me, I do notice I'm the only woman on my team. During the meeting, I'm the only one. Yeah, so I feel it's not enough women in the tech industry. Yeah, I don't know why. There's just more guys at school for a computer science major, so there's more men workers. But for UX designers, I remember at school, there's more girls than guys. But at the workplace, there's like more guys than girls. Okay, so here we can see this critique of a lack of diversity. And this concern for diversity also manifests with regard to technology. So Michael, a data scientist, told me, I have problems with the sort of application of AI and machine learning right now by large Silicon Valley players that are happily building their personal biases into algorithms and no end in sight. So what can we see here? I would argue we can see here, a problematization of a lack of diversity and a reflection of the inscription of the encoding of bias into the digital means of production, into digital technology. So I would say what's really important to note about tech workers, what I try to bring across in my talks, is we would be misunderstanding them as tech bros. Most of the interviewees I met, they would really be mischaracterized as blunt tech bros who don't care about bias, who don't care about diversity. That might be true for the managerial upper class, but it's not true for the middle layers in the tech workforce, let alone because, in my sample, 25% were women. But even among the male tech workers, I would say the majority of them do not fit that social figure. But again, there is a flip side. So there's potential for emancipation. Tech workers want to improve the world. There's a deep longing to be on the right side of history and to do something, to do good through their work. But again, there is a flip side in the sense that tech workers, concern for diversity, we can already see that now in the US it might be changing, but there was an appropriation of that ethos into corporate cultures. There was a superficial appropriation of the concern for diversity. There was even something which I call in the book the spirit of capitalism, which evolves around the play of differences, meaning that a lot of tech companies try to hijack this rhetoric, and successfully did hijack this rhetoric of diversity to advocate for, or by linking diversity to innovation, by advocating that, we're going to have some diversity and that's really going to make things more innovative, etc. But there was never really a meaningful engagement with the issue. And then, of course, it's also, yeah, it is fair to say that there are persistent forms of race and gender-based discrimination, also age-based discrimination, by the way, which is also an under-researched topic. But there are these, yeah, subtle forms of racism and this gender discrimination that are definitely still persistent. So, for instance, one thing I found is that often data scientists, which is a more male profession, they would frame UX designers as less technical, and that then also had salary implications for that more female profession of UX design. Okay, so again, there are these contradictions. There is this true and genuine aspiration for emancipation among tech workers, but there is kind of always a contradictory kind of flip side to their social codes. Okay, let's look at the professional roles. So you might be wondering, how do tech workers manage to align their critical worldviews with their organizational embeddedness in these hyper-capitalist organizations? Well, one mechanism is to positioning themselves as brokers of needs. So Dalia, a UX designer, told me there are the stakeholder needs, which are the business needs, there are the user needs, and then there are the engineering requirements or constraints. And you need to figure out how to balance all of these. And then you see the Venn diagram of stakeholder needs and user needs and obviously engineering constraints. That sweet spot, which is not very easy to get all the time, is where I try to design for. So here we can see tech workers like to be hybrids. They like to be balancers, almost these diplomatic subjects who try to broker user and business needs and thereby stay somewhat true to their identity and to their aspiration of wanting to improve the world. So if I had to put the findings of the book of my research into one sentence, I would say the fundamental code of tech workers and maybe also other middle class occupations is they want to be middle class wealthy and morally worthy. That's kind of the deep code. That's the deep kind of identity structure, the deep identity aspiration that tech workers cultivate. They want to have a comfortable, relatively secure middle class way of life. They want to be able to buy a house in Hackney, maybe a 3-bedroom, but they want to have a house with a small garden in Hackney. They want to go on vacation. They want to go to, do really interesting trips, be a kind of comfortable explorer in interesting settings. But they also want to do good. They also want to improve the world somehow. So they have this kind of split identity. They don't want to work for banks. They don't want to work in finance or consulting. They don't see purpose in that. But they do see purpose. They do see potential in tech. And in tech, they also see the potential for them to reproduce the class position that most of them grew up with. 80% of my interviews came from the middle class. So tech workers, they are middle-class subjects, most of them, and they want to reproduce how they got to know the world in relatively comfortable economic conditions, but they also are deeply troubled by the state of the world, and they want to do something about it. And that leads them to tech companies. There's these like small cues where they, people nowadays, especially in the middle class, they like kind of scan, where are you politically positioned? So that's also something I noticed in the interview, which is a social skill, right? Maybe you increasingly need that skill in the current climate, right? To check, to scan the political attitudes of your customer or of your colleague, because tech is becoming increasingly a diverse political space. I think it's kind of moving away from its more center-left establishment. But maybe you can tell me more about that. Okay, let's move on. The third dimension in my book. So I talk about worldviews, professional roles, and now we come to the lifestyles. What can we find here? Well, one lifestyle is mindfulness. Emma, a data scientist from Germany, told me, I work from 9 to 5, then from 5 to 7, it's like family time. And then afterwards, I'll maybe, depending on if I need to or not, I'll work 1 or 2 more hours in the evening. And I only do it if it's necessary. Also, I have friends like in consultancy that work really crazy hours, and I just don't know why they do it. Okay, we can see interesting boundary making against consultants. But what we can also see is a redifferentiation between work and life. Tech workers don't want to be entrepreneurial selves who kind of don't have any boundaries, who are constantly switched on. They kind of revalorize this, kind of unsexy 9-to-5 work regime, or recently unsexy 9-to-5 work regime. Again, though, I would say there is some kind of flip side in the sense that here we can again see a very individualist challenge to neoliberalism, right? The idea is not, hey, let's join or let's build up a union to change the work hours. It's more, I want to kind of arrange my working sphere. I try to put my own limits. So it's an individualist response. I'm not saying it's wrong, right? I'm just, it might be very effective and it might be the best you can do, right? I'm just saying currently most tech workers, when they see a problem, tech workers, they don't think about what can we do, right? The standard modus operandi of tech workers, they see lots of problems. They're very attentive to problems in society. But tech workers, when they see a problem, the first intuition is they think about what can I do, not what can we do, right? That's the modus operandi. Okay, let's look at another lifestyle, ordinariness. Might be the most provocative. When I conducted interviews and I asked my interviews, what do you like to do after work? What do you like to do on the weekend? They told me the ideal night for me, it's like make a big meal, have some friends over, eat, play some board games, have a bunch of more people come over. Rachel told me, I like to run, hang out with friends and family and go to concerts. I have a little dog and I like to kind of take my dogs on walks and go to like coffee shops and things like that. So what I think is interesting about tech workers' presentations of their lifestyles is that they want to appear down to earth. They're not talking about going to the opera, going to plays. They're not talking about, playing their instruments. They're kind of keen to foreground their ordinariness. They're kind of, I do kind of, maybe lowbrow things or very accessible things. I am an ordinary person outside of work. And I think that here again, we see here's potential for emancipation because ordinariness does hold the potential for a lowering of cultural boundaries between the middle and the working class. But I do think we have to come to terms with the fact that, tech workers typically celebrate ordinariness in pricey, exclusive metropolitan locations. And I think we can go one step further. We can say that this celebration of ordinariness, it actually allows tech workers to continue pulling away economically from a generally declining middle class without attracting much critique, without attracting much attention. So in a way, I would say here we have a strategy without strategists. I'm not saying tech workers are doing this like very intentionally, but I think it does have the effect that, tech workers are not really too much on the front stage. They're not like bankers. Like remember 2008, bankers were very much a group of that received criticism. It's not the same with tech workers, even though there's a tech backlash, etc. But tech workers aren't that much under scrutiny, and I would argue that's because of the lifestyle of ordinariness. Okay, finally, last thing I want to talk about the lifestyles is tech workers also have this kind of ecological distinction going on. So one thing that came up again and again when I talked with tech workers about their lifestyles is that they are really worried about climate change. So Moritz told me, hey, so when I see flights, I see, hey, you can balance your CO2 emissions now if you donate €2. I'm not fully sure how this works, but I believe it, maybe because I want to believe it. So I do this basically every time. And then smaller restrictions, like within Germany, I don't fly anymore, these kinds of things. If I go to Poland or Amsterdam, for example, I take the train, even though it's a little uncomfortable. So I'm trying to find a balance of not doing things if it's still feasible. So tech workers, on the one hand, they're keen to show this inner conflict. They are aware that, they are having an emission-intensive lifestyle, but they want to also show that they are kind of aware of this, that they find it problematic. But again, they turn to these individual solutions. And I would also say here we can see some of the elements of the neoliberal self in the sense, it's this culture of self-improvement. And it's also, I would argue, tech workers also have this high estimation of their individual capacity to bring about change in the world. So that really comes up again and again, even with climate change. that tech workers, often believe that they as an individual can have a very big impact. And I would say that's again linked to middle class background, where, unlike the working class, you do grow up in settings where you feel more self-effectual. Okay, let me wrap up. So my fundamental argument was that tech workers are on this quest to be middle class wealthy and morally worthy. They are no holistically market-oriented selves. They would be misunderstood as pure, straightforward tech bros, and their subjectivity signal emancipatory potential from within the tech industry, and that makes them a really interesting and potentially powerful social group for anybody interested in social change. However, their social codes are quite or heavily symbolic. Tech workers' codes are also very much open to appropriation by tech firms, and there are these riddled class reproductive tendencies among the social codes of tech workers, like we saw with ordinariness. So I would argue the emergence of this post-entrepreneurial self, of these post-entrepreneurial codes that tech workers cultivate, it calls attention for, the potential for emancipation, but also for a reproduction of relations of domination. And institutions, any social actor wanting change will have to, come to terms with this contradictory class identity. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to the discussion.